Trumptopia. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, the ever-crazy, ever-irrational, ever-absurdist, incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I don't think I'm irrational. I guess I get called that sometimes by irrational people. But I digress. Happy, made-up, commercialized holiday about a pseudo-religious inspired thing that it doesn't really exist. Do I sound jaded enough? Happy Valentine's Day, Trumptopia. Today is the 14th day of the second month of the second year of Trump Nation. The glorious Trumptopia. The bold new Cheeto-colored age of Trumpinism. Or just Trumpism, not Trumpinism. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. We have to start off the show on a somber note and acknowledge that there's been yet another mass shooting, once again on a school campus. Accounts vary. I was just flipping through the Big Ten major cable news channels, local and national. The big three, the big however many you want to cut it down to, it's all the same. And figures had it at the 8th or maybe 13th school campus shooting of 2018. It's Valentine's Day. I decided to go ahead and Google it, because Google knows everything. And I went ahead and visited two apparently independent and seemingly accurate, or at least, as close to accurate as you can ask any human organization to be, massshootingtracker.org and gunviolencearchive.org. According to Mass Shooting Tracker, this is I don't think that they've added this new shooting yet, but as of this morning, before the reporting on this new shooting, we were on the 39th mass shooting incident of the year, starting since January. And I'm sure they had more to add, and they will have more to add between now and this time tomorrow. According to Gun Violence Archive, for 2018, we've had a total number of 6,505 incidents. That's as of the last update. They update, I presume, once a day. 3,100 injuries and 1,796 deaths. 331 of those injured or killed were teenagers between the ages of 12 or 17. 69 of them were children under the age of 11. 29 incidents, according to their calculations. There is a sort of standard, two basic metrics, two basic Rubicons by which people measure mass shooting incidents, and they have slightly different parameters. Thus, we get differences in these accounts. Something also that's sort of like, you should know about any one of these databases that are out there. One of the most shocking things about our culture is that it is 2018, and not once ever in our history has it been considered a patriotic idea to organize a system by which we can collect tabulate and properly statistically analyze the available factual numbers of gun violence incidents and shootings and deaths related to those in a sort of centralized and national cohesive way. That's something we've never apparently allowed ourselves to do. Stick a pin in that thought for a few minutes. I will hopefully remember to come back to it and discuss. I wanted to highlight a couple of more statistics from this page. This is from a table at the very front of the Gun Violence Archive on their front page. So they, as of their last calculation, tabulated 29 confirmed mass shootings. As you might remember. The other website, massshootingtracker.org, calculated, and there were 10 more than that. Officer-involved incident, officer shot or killed, 38. So in the past 2 months, 38 officers have been shot or killed. Now, an officer-involved incident where the subject or suspect was shot or killed, 286. Now, why should we trust these numbers? Who knows? Is it a George Soros owned front for disinformation? Who knows? Is it owned by some devious person on the right or on the left or in the middle? Who knows? From my ability, my limited capacity, and I'll admit it to you guys up front. Warning: this is an opinion show, and it's a one-man operation. I haven't, although I've sort of half-assedly been recruiting for collaborators. No real magic has been struck yet. I digress. I do my best. Often do not have the time, but from what I've been able to gather, these two websites are well-intentioned nonprofit organizations run by honest people who are just simply trying to gather as much factual information as they can and put together the statistics that will help us understand the phenomena of gun violence in America. So who knows? If anybody has got some definitive proof, I'd love to see it, that any of these are, some sort of disinformation mechanism for some sort of devious organization. Not that I'm casting, doubts or aspersions. I've just heard that kind of talk, which is quite fascinating. So today's episode, I wanted to first of all open up with an acknowledgement that there's a gun violence problem in this country. Arguably on the planet, the human species has an addiction to these machines of death. And to that end, I'd like to, really sober up the moment and take a brief moment of silent prayer and sending of love and energy to anybody everywhere that has been subjected to this kind of violence in their environment, in their life, and has to either live with it and put up with it or has suffered many losses or whatnot. Because this is impacting a massive amount of people, passively and actively. And so that goes out across all socio-political, ideological lines. When I pray for the victims, I don't just pray for the Christian victims. I don't only pray for the white victims. I don't only pray for the victims that remind me of myself. I don't only pray for the victims from the countries I like. I pray for all of them everywhere. And I pray for those who own guns. Not in a judgmental, pejorative way. I have nothing against guns. Since this is going to be a gun-themed episode and a war profiteering-themed episode, I want to put the disclaimer in now. I have nothing against guns. They are just a tool like any other tool. They're just a tool that was also, like any other tool, designed specifically for one purpose, which is the death of that which is entered by the bullet. You don't expect them or want them, if you're hunting for pleasure or for meat, you aren't intending to shoot them and then, rehabilitate them after they're, take care of their injuries. You want them to die. If you're shooting at people, sometimes we allow ourselves to stop the bad guys by blowing out their kneecaps. Most of the time we shoot to kill, especially in this country, especially in other countries that have as deep of a sociopathic self-destructive addiction to these machines that are explicitly designed to peel open the human body in a way that is, pardon the pun, mind-blowingly disturbing. So I'm not out to legislate guns because I understand that the addiction and the problem and the issue is not with the object itself. It's with the people who designed it, sold it, normalized it, popularized it, made it cool, and facilitated and through brainwashing, facilitated the community-wide divorcing of its intent in design and its acceptance. So, originally for this episode, and I thought about splitting them up, but they seem to really go hand in hand. Originally for this episode, I was going to discuss some of yesterday's interesting political hearings. There was quite an array of political hearings going on Capitol Hill. And for those of you who don't trust the mainstream media, I strongly encourage you to invest the time and effort in getting to know C-SPAN, because while you could dubiously claim that it is part of the same media machine, it is at least a live, uninterrupted, uncommentated on feed to public governance, the parts that you're allowed to see at any rate. So, for example, for those who doubt that the newspapers and the TV channels are going to fairly represent whatever happened at the hearing, you can just go to C-SPAN and watch it in its entirety and decide for yourself. Let me give you my take based on my sample viewing. I didn't sit through the entirety of either of these two hearings, but I did dip into them at good long chunks, like a good 7 minutes at a time, and then flipped around and also did other things throughout my day. But some common themes seemed to emerge, and that's what I've summarized in the second half of today's title, Weaponizing the Fear of Cyber Attacks. So here we are, Valentine's Day, and the cacophony, the noise machine of news coverage is all about the sexual predator who sits in the White House and is in complete and total radical self-denial that he's a sexual predator, and who has gone to great lengths to defend the honor and the prestige of other exposed sexual predators, and his whole crazy noise machine to try to distract you from the Russia investigation. That layered on top of this interesting wave of testimony being given by experts in our nation's upper echelon of, the agencies and organizations that are dedicated, or supposed to be dedicated in theory. I don't know, there's lots of complaints against them coming from all sides, decrying their capacity to actually do their job. But at some point you have to, like, for example, for national intelligence, or not national intelligence, what is it? There's another, where are we? Both at the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, featuring, as people testifying, Dr. Richard Harknett, a Ms. Heather Connolly, a Mr. Robert Butler, and a Dr. Michael Solmire, all of whom had, affiliations with big important universities and were, chairs or whatever, important figures in the departments of the appropriate departments. I didn't have time to note them all down. I'm a terrible citizen journalist. Forgive me. You can look them all up. And also to finish my point here, at the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing on worldwide threats, which is quite an interesting, broad net to cast out there, and also sort of reminds you of World War III, WWT, worldwide threats that will trigger World War III. And at that hearing, the top 6 intelligence chiefs of the United States, or the Trumptopian intelligence agencies, testified before a panel. And then those top 6 intelligence chiefs are the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates. And I can't remember if he's a Trump appointee, but I kind of think he is. But I could be totally wrong about that. The CIA's director, Mike Pompeo, who I know for certain is a Trump appointee, who should be all pro Team Trump, right? The FBI director, who everyone should be aware, under very crazy circumstances, is the Trump appointed director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, right? Also, the Defense Intelligence Agency Director, Lieutenant General Robert Ashley, the National Security Agency Director, Admiral Mike Rogers, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency Director, Robert Cardillo. The NGIA is an agency I don't remember ever hearing about before. So, but I also sort of lump them all together and should pay more attention, right? We all should. But all 6 of these men, two of whom for sure, are appointed to their jobs that they're currently testifying, as from that seat, from that position of, this is me doing my job, are Trump appointed. So therefore, you would think Trump loyalists, and several others who I think, generally speaking, Trump has either made, parading and dismissive comments, or has simultaneously praised them as great military leaders. It's all a mishmash of, you can't quite tell where Trump sits with anybody. Unilaterally testified that Russia is a real thing, that the Russia intervention thing is a real thing. This is the testimony that we've been, as a nation, sort of waiting for, because in the absence of these men actually saying to us live on television, without any, again, if you were just watching C-SPAN, nobody was commentating. And in fact, the MSNBC and the CNN, and when I flipped through all the channels, they were just raw live feed. And, we'll parse this out later, for specifically for the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing. And that's not even where I want to really delve into, okay? Because I've been proposing to everybody that Russia as a tactic has been both very real and also being used as a ruse, a red herring, a distraction. In one of my most harshly worded memes, because I dared called its reader a rube, I said, of course Russia is a ruse, you rube. And I was just running with the alliteration when I typed it up. I wasn't trying to be that dismissive. I'm not a hateful person. But if you believe that Russia's totally fake news, then you really let yourself drink the Kool-Aid, because it's been proven that the fake news hashtag originated on Russian computers, probably designed by Russian social media hackers that are, back when they were using it against their own people to manage expectations about what news is real news. But I digress. That's not even the main point. The freakier, more sort of synergistic thing that happened during the segments of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing and the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Cyber Security, and others that I've checked into, symposiums in different places. C-SPAN and C-SPAN 2 and 3 are really, go to cspan.org, check it out. If you want to see raw feeds of news makers, in other words, the people that get reported on, actually sharing what may or may not be scripted, what may or may not be genuine opinions, but without any spin on it, just what they factually say. My theory is everybody's been hijacked, right? Everyone's is being puppeteered. But if we can hold them accountable, we can hold them accountable. We just need to cut out all the middlemen telling us what to think out, and then just actually pay attention to what our representatives and our leaders and our figureheads tell us and hold them accountable to it, because they often... But I digress. The synergistic scary part that synergizes with today's sad and depressing news is the alarmism and the sort of weaponization of what's going on in our world. In the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, it was the weaponization of cyber attacks. And of course, that was also directly commented on in the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing on worldwide threats, because they had to broach the very crazy subject of, was Russia a real deal, or is it, as our president continues to insist, totally fake news, a witch hunt, and radically entirely made up. And while people continue to fight about it on the internet, the fact of the matter is that it's spying on each other never stopped, right? All countries, to the maximum ability that they can, spy on other countries, especially ones that they have some sort of idiotic rivalry with. And who of the countries that have become superpowers or could be called superpowers alongside the United States or Trumptopia have we long had a standing rivalry with? The Soviet Union. Duh. It's ridiculous it's naive to think that they are innocently standing by waiting for us to be their friends again. They're not. They have a long history of fucking with and interfering with the politics of their own people, because they're a very large nation, right? And so regions have local government to some extent or whatever, although they are very top-downish anyways. But people are controlled and manipulated. There's a long history of it. We've been spying on them to learn. This country, our country, has been spying on Russia for decades, and in part, I wouldn't be surprised if it was exposed to learn how they do it. Probably, maybe, just maybe, to try that fucking shit on you, on us. But I digress from that rabbit hole. The weaponization of threats, perceived or imagined, that's what's freaking weird about this Valentine's Day. If we look at the overall word cloud of our news headlines, Valentine's Day 2018 is about war with North Korea, cyber war, which could turn into nuclear war with Russia, trade war, which could turn into nuclear war with China. Now, why do I say that? Here's something that I didn't think to fit into the title or the description of the show. One of the other really fascinating things that has been happening in our government, behind the cacophony of distractions and whirligigs and curvaceous porn stars getting payoffs for hush money, behind all that crazy distractionary noise, the administration has put out its tragically titled, I say tragically because its acronym or short name is the same as National Public Radio, which can make it confusing. It was confusing when National Public Radio broached this subject over a month ago, I believe, which is now just sort of hitting the C-SPAN / nerdy, not quite mainstream news fringes. And I'm sure we'll eventually get a few moments in the news cycle on the mainstream news towers, is that the administration has put forth a new nuclear position report, I think what it's called, but shorthanded to NPR, where it explicitly spells out its agenda as, the new leadership of this country, of what it wants to do with its nuclear arsenal, its nuclear gameplay rulebook, its nuclear positioning in terms of, whether it's defensive. We've been working very hard, for those who don't remember, to minimize the nuclear stockpile. We once thought collectively across the aisles in a bipartisan way that reducing nuclear stockpiles were a great idea, because the less we had nuclear radiation sitting around that could be utilized or accidentally triggered or, in whatever way sort of hijacked and used against us, the better. And so that was happening for quite a bit, and we apparently stopped. So that stopped, and we've now overtly declared that we, instead of minimizing, instead of working towards nuclear disarmament, we now are in a new nuclear arms race with our enemies. Weaponizing the fear of attack, whether it's cyber, whether it's nuclear, whether it's financial. The thing that I'm trying to address here is, in all these different symposiums and hearings that were going on in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, there's been a constant commentary about militarizing our response to non-military attacks on the country. So not only did, yes, Russia really actually intervene in our election through attempts at hacking, data stealing, leaking, et cetera, and the most sort of mind-bogglingly obvious and yet really effective, to the point where some people continue to cling to those sources, like the fake news manipulation of fake trending. People believe certain things that were basically not true because they saw an overwhelming number of people approve of those things on their social media through likes and shares. If 150 million or whatever it is, 150,000 people shared this, and they all are like me and are as thoughtful and discerning as I self-entitledly believe myself to be, then it probably is more true than whatever my enemy is peddling, whatever the Democrats are saying, whatever the opposite team thinks is the truth. And that's why we see Trump fans, true hardcore Trump supporters, cling to things that are just like, this is not real, you guys. This is very real, you guys. Why are you? And I want to connect it with something. The powers that be and those who profit from this kind of conflict are clearly expressing their agenda of weaponizing the fear, weaponizing our response to the fear of a future attack. So even if Russia was fake, which we're being told is real by people who have sort of failed to comment on it yet, and that the only person who, in terms of officially openly declaring it, right, all the reporting off with sources familiar with the subject, etc., has indicated that yes, indeed, the surveillance community, the spy community on our team thinks that the spy community on their team has been up to some shenanigans. And slowly but surely, fewer and fewer and fewer politicians have been willing to toe the line of, that's totally fake news. And if you look around now, pretty much the only one is Trump and the craziest of the hardcore Trumpians. The Trumpians, as I like to call them. What does it mean when the most guilty person is also the only person decrying they're innocent, the most guilty-looking person, forgive me. I didn't mean to presume guilt. It is due process. He's right about that. And as I've always said, the most freaky, scary power that Trump has is to, and I say skillfully because the man plays an idiot, but I don't think he's a fool. I think he's a very, very, very savvy individual who knows how to sound just yokily enough and knows how to be just generically idiotic enough so that, and I'm not trying to call anybody stupid, but rather so that anybody of any level of gullibility will feel that he is an example of how they aren't, of what they are like too. It's easily you can easily identify with him. I've felt myself swept up in very rare occasions of his speech giving where I'm like, he really sometimes can make a lot of sense. I'm like, whoa. That's his charm offensive, which I'm not saying it's always on point. I'm just saying when it is very effective. It can be very effective, and it's not lost on me. I understand what he's capable of, I think, and it's naive. I guess what I'm getting at is it's naive to dismiss him outright as an idiot because he has achieved his objectives, and most idiots don't. But I digress. This weaponizing, this normalizing, this, and what do I mean by weaponizing? The advancing of the notion that it is, although never has been before, it is now appropriate to invoke military action in response to things that were not necessarily military attacks. And so it seems like a very strange moment in history, right? We're really getting, because the echo chambers have been really hard at work, and so everyone's sort of cocooned. Most average voters in the electorate, let's put it that way, people who vote and who are still sort of deeply subscribed in the system and who don't question their media sources at all, who just sort of consume their echo chamber, they are deeply schismed and really, really wrapped up in patriotism and us versus them denial of our group is the righteous group, your group is the evil, cowardly, it's totally acceptable to spit in your face and call you names kind of brainwashing. So it's hard to read clearly what, especially one of the growing voices or choruses in our society is the everything deniers, to try to weave this towards my overall point. We've got the establishment finally speaking up and saying, hey, some of this stuff that you guys have been arguing about whether or not it's real, and it's scary, and we're already behind schedule in preparing ourselves for the next wave, the next onslaught, because attacks always come in waves, right? The brunt of the attack peters off, and then you're left wondering what the fuck happened. That's where we are in terms of those impacted by the propaganda campaign being waged by the moneyed interests, some of whom, and I'm telling you, it's not just Russia, but we're getting a confirmation from within the system that this Russia stuff is a little bit more real than some of us have wanted it to be. And why is it that, hold on, let me try to gather to a point here. I can anticipate a lot of the sort of response, and one of the things that's really dividing the nation is this rebuttal by the everything deniers. But that's all just fake news. You can't trust any media sources. You can't trust the deep state. You can't trust any politician that's against Donald Trump. You can't trust any politician that's for Donald Trump. Everybody's being played in every direction to doubt everything. And that's what we have to be vigilant against. Doubting everything. If everything is fake, if everything is fake news, if nothing can be verified, even the fact checkers are owned by this guy or that guy, and they're heavily vested in the wrong direction, so you can't believe them. If everyone believes that, and, mind you, this is something I'm sure I've rambled about in past episodes, and I'm sure I'll ramble about in future episodes. If you add the following ingredient to this mess, if belief manifests, then how do we sort it all out? We are really sort of clashing, culminating in this like perfect storm of clashing echo chambers. But all of it has a common thread. And I think that's where we can start to unravel the mystery. If I may be so humble to suggest, all of it can be, as confusing as it is, if you step out of the box that you're standing in and realize that you're probably still inside a yet larger box that's part of some of the same fractions or divides, fissures, divisions. Our society as it is, and as I've argued in past episodes, has been for much longer than just our current historical epoch. This is older than America. This is older than the EU. This is older than... But most certainly, for sure, if you want to get to a definitive place where you can put a pin on it and not worry too much about everything before that, pretty much since World War II, everything is a societal manipulation construct that is anchored in the self-righteousness. I am better than that other group. I and my group are better than you and your other group. Is at the center of everything, of all of this. Why? People call me crazy, but I see it everywhere in action. It's the most obvious thing. Everyone's busy arguing instead of uniting in order to solve the problem. Everyone's busy fighting for or against Trump, for or against the FBI investigation, for or against the Mueller investigation, those are different investigations, right? Or have you forgotten? For or against the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing investigation. We're a for or against Republican point of view or Democratic point of view, or this for or against statism. We are managed by division and divisiveness. And that's what gets us to be complacent about the ongoing profiteering on the conflict that divisiveness causes. And these ever-escalating shooting incidents, these mass shootings, that's just one of the symptomologies of the divisive, violent, conflict-causing brainwashing that we've all been exposed to. And here we are on a bloody holiday, because I don't think that there was... If you look into the history... I think I should have prepared to do a special St. Valentine's Day episode. I might do that later today. I might actually keep this episode under an hour. Huzzah to that. So I suggest to you, my friends, that as we celebrate this pseudo-religious profiteering holiday that capitalizes on our ego weaknesses about being alone and being left behind, being lonely and needing to have someone to copulate with, because those are some of the most brutally sublimated impulses in human society that we have zero education, thoughtfulness around. Not really, truly, deeply thoughtful education. But that's a whole nother episode, right? And we're surrounded with this cacophony of real and fake news. It can't all be fake news. It can't all be real either. There's definitely a bias. I'm constantly sort of trying to argue the middle ground with people. And I'm really shocked at not actually, I guess I'm not shocked. I guess I know that it should be shocking to me. Just the rate of incidence in my little limited scope of social media influence at this time. It's not like I have 1 million followers. I've only got, I've almost maxed out my Facebook account, and that's still I'm only seeing a certain percentage of that on my stream, and even though I try to hop around. But the number of instances where during some sort of discussion on someone else's post, there'll be this absolutely hardcore, abject denial rejection of all news sources, that everything that's media is fake. And yet these people will then, and this is the humorous part that makes me giggle, they'll then post stuff from YouTube or Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia is supposed to be, if you think everything's bought and owned and operated and has been hijacked and corrupted, then everything has been bought and owned and operated and has been hijacked and corrupted by the oppressors. Why are you telling me to go to watch this thing on YouTube that's owned by Google, which is one of the largest evil corporations on the planet? If it is an evil corporation, right? It's like, make up your mind. YouTube is owned by Google, and Google definitely is big enough to qualify as a giant evil corporation. I think it dwarfs Walmart, right? And that's the one everyone's typically the most angry at, in general terms, I think. But I digress. There's this interesting just uptick of everything deniers. We're used to climate deniers. Slowly but surely, I think we are making gains. As someone that identifies on the other side of that division, that there's definitely some form of climate change, and that, it must be a combination of natural phenomena and the input, because here's the part that deniers don't comprehend, and that even some supporters of climate change also fail to comprehend, and that whenever we flatten and two-dimensionalize things out, and we're just arguing for the sake of arguing, nobody learns anything new. But climate is a sophisticated system of systems. So, no single thing can be singled out. It's all interconnected. And our pollution input, which, by the way, here's an independent, again, it's sort of like a catch-22. It's an independent fact, but it's totally inseparable from this particular thing that I'm discussing. Over 7 million people a year die from the impact of air pollution and the fact that they're breathing in dirty, toxic air. We do not have a number fixed on how many people are dying from ocean pollution yet, because we're still turning a blind eye to the fact that we treat our mother's oceans like sewers, and we just dump all our toxic shit into it and don't ever think twice about that. No matter how you box yourself in a box in your mind about ideological constructs, all the water is one system on this planet. So if you dump in this one lake or in this one stream or in this one part of the ocean, guess what? That dumping will eventually migrate and naturally travel through the entire interconnected system of the entire planet's water. So it's mind-blowing, right? So digressing a bit, we're in this climate not by accident. Everything deniers exist. This growing movement of people who blindly and abjectly reject whatever media source they've been told or conditioned to reject, and will accept whatever silly quote unquote alternative media source because they've been told and conditioned to accept it, and without any real proof that media source is more valid than any other. I'm not here to do that, folks. I'm here to share with you my thoughts as a concerned citizen based on what I'm able to observe. So this is what I'm observing. I'm seeing a growing demographic of people that can be called that. Everything deniers. Climate change is fake. Air pollution is fake. Fukushima is fake. The moon landing is fake. 9/11 was fake. It started as the truther movement is slowly devolving in many quarters, because there was never one cohesive truth or movement. It was just one cohesive sort of profile picture meme movement. But in terms of like what intellectual ideas were being honed in on and focused on, there was never cohesive communication there. And that's fine. That's sort of organic grassroots anyways, I suppose. But I don't think that any of this is by accident, right? And the biggest trend that I see sort of overtaking all of these movements that are inclined to deny media sources, factual sources, scientific sources. Science is to be denied and rejected outright. Any science, climate science, health science. We've got vaccine deniers. We've got every kind of we deny that this is real kind of denier possible. So in a world where you're surrounded by factions of people who deny that anything can be trusted, one is left with, very strange alternatives. And sort of the most cumbersome is to try to figure out what is worth believing and what is not worth believing. And the most sort of convenient, which tragically we are really flawed in having a draw towards. We're really drawn as a species towards convenience and sort of the path of least resistance. And I guess one could argue that that's sort of some symptomology of survival learning, right? Like we learned to survive, and then we really didn't take it easy when we needed to take it easy because times are hard. So whenever you could, you needed to bank up on that taking it easy shit. But I digress. In this kind of environment, like trying to have a conversation about anything becomes toxic. Trying to establish some sort of consensus on how to solve any of the problems becomes ever increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, things keep happening. More and more noise is added to the system of echo chamber craziness, and more real life shit gets gotten away with and either completely ignored or used as an excuse to engender emotional violence between people who are trying to figure out what's real. The amount of verbal abuse that gets unleashed when someone is trying to, is categorically in denial of something that might possibly be real is really quite mind-blowing. For example, in a post about climate change, I indicated that, it's been documented by multiple independent documentarians as well as mainstream news agencies that small island communities deep in the Pacific have been forced to move off their islands because of alarming and unprecedented ocean sea level rise. Okay? Where at least small, 3 or 4 small townships have had to evacuate because they lived on such small islands that a little bit of sea level rise was enough to cause catastrophic damage. And that's, of course, the everything deniers will unleash this torrent of pejorative talk. You're such an idiot because you believe the mainstream media and you believe these lies you're being pumped about. There's nothing going on. That's just a bunch of, CGI'd images to make you believe that this is happening and scaremonger you into paying higher prices at the gas pump, and all this rationale about why whatever at hand is fake and not to be denied, and how you're an idiot because of it. And what I always ask them in response is, okay, I'm not going to get into an argument about whether or not this is real. I'm going to ask you the following question: how did that torrent of hate language help solve any problem, whether your perceived problem of fake news happening everywhere, or my perceived problem of real climate change happening. It doesn't, right? If we disengage and set aside ideological constructs and really take a big step back, we can see that there's a cohesive set of patterns involved here. And this is what I'm driving at. These mechanisms of weaponizing everything so that everything is a seam of potential division. No matter where you go, no matter what the topic is, you're going to, instead of having interesting, open-minded public discourse where you thoughtfully explain your position and then open-mindedly listen to other people thoughtfully explain their position, everyone's in there like it's a fucking MMA ring and you're supposed to beat the shit out of each other with your words to prove that you're the mightiest of the mighty. Therefore, your viewpoint on the world must be true. That's the way we've been manipulated most recently. That's not coming exclusively from Russia. The United States have been doing this to its own citizens for decades. Russia's been doing it to their citizenry for decades. If you want to keep it clean and neat and simple, pretty much since World War I and II. World War I and World War II happened, and the profiteers realized, oh wow, with tribalism and nationalism in some sort of new hybridized version, we can brainwash these populations into hating other populations of people without any fucking reason, and then trigger the kind of national anger causing, triggering sort of events so that we can totally write off a war declaration and just go get them whipped up and ready to sit around for a few years blowing each other's brains out. Whenever I get to this level of the conversation, I'm always reminded of the meme. I wish I'd made it. I didn't. But the simplest way to honor veterans is to stop creating new ones. I have been for a long time now, long before I decided to have a podcast, long before I was on social media, and then I decided to start posting openly about it. For a long, long time, I've been sharing with those who I thought were capable of processing it the notion that, we are being played, all of us, against each other for the purposes of, preventing, and I'm going from a top-down explanation, the primary purpose of keeping the human species really, really busy, hating each other, arguing each other, fighting in the name of God at each other, fighting in the name of politics at each other, and generally judging and spewing hate, and which then breeds violence at each other for any number of reasons, whatever, insert here the sort of logistical reasons. That's profitable to the profiteering class and gives them many levers of control over us to normalize and manufacture consent for multiple levels of conflict, domestically and internationally. And here we are. If there isn't any more singular, crazy proof of the thesis, it's Valentine's Day, a day supposedly dedicated to celebrating love, both romantic and humanitarian love, because St. Valentine's, in his mythological form, was not just about marrying, Romeo and Juliet like archetypically sweetheart rich people running away from their oppressive parents. He also generally advocated, as most mystics do, the power of compassionate, unconditional loving of each other as members in a, spiritual family, a species-wide spiritual family. That on this day, we also have to, be bombarded with blatant or completely fictional, who knows, national, statewide, international, global theaters of conflict and violence, which we've come to complacently just keep trudgingly putting up with. And a lot of people quite frighteningly, are like, woo, let's go with the gun violence. Let's set up gun violence arenas and get at it, at the manly work of destroying each other. Let's go to war and kill all the bad guys. Let's have a revolution and chop off all their heads. I'm totally failing at keeping this episode under an hour. Forgive me, folks. It always just sort of flows out of me until it peters out, and I'm left here at this juncture that we have to. How do we answer? How do we hold ourselves responsible? How do we hold each other responsible? How do we hold the bad guys responsible if we don't know how to discern what is true and what is untrue? Well, I ask you the most insane-sounding question, my friends. The thing that gets people triggered and started, calling me crazy. And that's, can you trust your own experience? What is the most true thing about your own phenomenological experience? And people have a lot of answers to that. And I think that therein somewhere we can begin to truly find the solution to all the madness. And for technical reasons that I've explained in previous episodes. So if you feel lost, if you're the kind of person that wants to support the love is the answer to all the problems, but also feels at a loss, like, how does that work? How do you love the Nazis into not being Nazis? How do you love a rapist into not being a rapist? How do you love, insert your favorite bad guy to feel victimized by and feel afraid of, so that you have to be a violent person? How do you replace that? How do you fix them? And according to all the research I've done, it starts by fixing oneself. And then having the capacity to help fix each other remotely, vis-a-vis, some esoteric and hitherto completely forgotten because of the suppression of wisdom, a spiritual network. A spiritual network that we're all naturally a part of, but we've all been so inundated in brainwashing that it's almost hard to accept at first because we've forgotten it so completely. In my attempt to slowly creep the time frame back on all these episodes, I'm going to stop there and come back to another episode with some pragmatic suggestions on what to do with that notion in terms of how does any one of us as an individual help save the world? We have to stop listening to the haters who reject the possibility that the world can be saved at all, because they're part of the problem, and giving in to their rationale only turns us into another part of the problem. And we have to understand that love is so much more than we've been allowed to comprehend, so much more than we've been allowed to define it as. And that's the beginning of the trip. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely Valentine's Day, and that you are able to carve out some time with your special someone, or with just yourself. Because truly, we must learn in our times of abject loneliness how to love ourselves in extreme loneliness, and extreme solitude, and extreme aloneness. We must learn how to love ourselves first, or else we will never find, draw, be attracted to, or attract towards us our true, match, or, friends of likelihood. We will never find others that we can be loved by if we don't conquer the challenge of loving ourselves. And that indeed is sort of one of the many steps on the path towards transforming not only ourselves as individuals, but ourselves as a family and as a species-wide network. to that end, I am sending you abundant love and energy. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.